Thank you very much. You can all hear me and you can see the slides? Excellent. So today I try to grasp the ungraspable impact, and I will also tell you why I think it is difficult to grasp. Because to put it in the words of Sherlock Holmes, the final problem is how to frame measuring, the impact of inclusion activities and how to pragmatically then measure it. Because that is the thing that I've seen people struggle with in all areas. I'm specializing in internationalization, but also work with NGOs, and inclusion is of course an important part of internationalization. And also then closely related to that, in order to measure, we will first have to know what we consider desired outcomes, right? If we don't know that, then we cannot measure it. So I will just try to shed some lights on it in 15 minutes, and let me just also start my own timer because I'm otherwise bad in keeping time. First of all, a bit about desired outcomes, and I would like to relate that also to some of the studies I did, and there's also something in the background. There are different aspects on inclusion. It's one part can be the active inclusion of people, but also I think very often it's about how to make people aware of inclusion issues. Because if the majority of people is not aware that inclusion is an issue, it will simply not happen. So what might help is to see that, for example, in this European voluntary service impact study we did, which was an impact study on one of the biggest projects, which is not a higher education project officially, it's officially a youth project on having people do voluntary service abroad. And we did an impact study on that, and we, among other things, we looked into the way that such activities working with people who were disadvantaged, etc., might change the mindset of people who do it. And you could see that really later on there was quite a high percentage of people who felt that inclusion is an issue and that it was part of the volunteering service. But also you could see we always had also in some aspects we had kind of a control group of volunteers who were not under the EVS program. So in general, what it shows is that if you get people involved in volunteering activities, they usually become quite aware of the relevance of inclusion, the problems of inclusion, how people are excluded from things. So in fact, the road is the goal here, right? In a certain way, get people doing it, and they will. But also when you looked at, more importantly, how did they feel about themselves becoming more aware of it? And that was quite interesting that in general, people felt quite more aware of the inclusion issue after an EVS activity. And you could see here how that differs slightly between different subgroups of people. But in general, it also means that people really see the problem more than they saw it before. And this also reflects a bit in some of the more qualitative aspects we added, where people said that before I was avoiding working with homeless people or Roma, and after I feel far more comfortable to do it. So inclusion is also, I think, something that has to do with changing the mindset of other people so that they are simply feeling more comfortable to deal with people they usually avoid. And it's, I think, a classical experience we have in society that the majority always avoids the minority. And often maybe not because of negative feelings, but often maybe because of feelings of own inadequacy, so that you think I am not adequate enough to deal with it, so I just avoid the problem because I see it as my problem. So in a certain way, I found this quite enticing in the study. But there are also other things which are related. For example, in the Erasmus study, we did an analysis of personality traits. And while we used a special set of items for that, nowadays I work a lot with the Big Five inventory, which I can really recommend. It has several aspects, and one of them is very closely related to all the aspects we want to look at, and that's the openness factor. I'll come to that in a second. But what we see here is that when you looked at the personality of people who were not mobile, it was highly significantly lower on all aspects than the one of people who decided to do some activity. And those who decided to do some activity again gained statistically significantly in their personality traits. And if we consider the aspect of inclusion here, it matters in two ways. First of all, because it opens everybody, not everybody technically, but statistically speaking, it usually will open most people. But more importantly, what we also saw is the lower the starting values, and the starting values were very closely related to socioeconomic advantages or disadvantages, the bigger the gain. So that means the disadvantaged people who could be convinced to participate in mobility, and that was difficult, gained more than the people who were already privileged. So these activities have a positive effect on the people, and basically that means on society, because all we want is to make everybody more able to participate and contribute to society. Also, of course, there are these, all these add-on effects. We constantly see that people who are disadvantaged in the very beginning it has an aggravating effect. In Germany, only 4% of male pupils with migration background from certain migration backgrounds go to university. For females, it's a lot less dramatic, 4% only, okay? Whereas 40% end up on social benefits. And this has, of course, if you do not study, you earn less. If you earn less, you have less opportunities, etc., etc., etc. So the ball keeps rolling, it's an avalanche. And here you could see how we had, particularly in Southern and Eastern Europe, we had statistically significant differences in unemployment rates between the non-mobile and the Erasmus people. And if you remember that Erasmus is not socially kind of inclusive, because you have 60-some% of the normal population from non-academic family background, but 60% of the mobile population is from academic family background. So Erasmus is not socially inclusive yet. And you see a huge advantage. So again, there is a need to do it. And this is what we want to see. We want to see lower unemployment rates for people with disadvantages, etc. And for these activities really pay off. But also you see that if you look at the differences in personalities between non-academic family background and academic family background, already there, the inclusion started. And that's where it is difficult. That's also where the limit of higher education is. This is what we deal with on a starting point. And this is why we have to discuss inclusion at a much earlier age already, because in higher education, it's sometimes too late. Those are really only very few. And Rekka, I will unhide several other slides, which I hid here because of time, so that you can use that later. Now we come to the thing that I really care about, because it's my specialization. I'm not an inclusion specialist. And that is about the measuring. And the first thing is, everybody knows or thinks how to measure input. Those are basically activities and resources you invest to achieve something. That's very simple. That's why everybody measures it. Typical example is number of partnerships. Yeah, fantastic. If you don't do anything in that partnership, it's completely worthless. So the number of partnerships has zero meaning, but it's always measured. Then we have output. So that's very obviously the result of an activity. For example, if you have partnerships, number of output could be the number of mobile students. Everybody knows that. It also has a very limited meaning, because you can send a lot of people, none of them learns anything, all come back very disappointed because nobody helped them. So you generated a generation of Donald Trumps. and you don't know about it. So I'm doubtful about output. And then impact. And impact is the most difficult thing. It's the effect something has on an individual or a group. And trust me, 99% of the universities do not have the faintest clue of what their real impact is, because that's like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You know where the electron is or how fast it is, but not at the same time. It's a blurred concept, but you can tackle it. So basically, it sounds all simple, but usually a lot of universities and a lot of projects get these three confused. Many talk to me about outputs when they mean impact, but it's really not. And also very often we do irrelevant or unacceptable inferences and conclusions from data, things that are not justified to say. Classical, oh, we have 5% more of this, that means that this was the effect. No, it could just be accidental. You know, I will talk about some measurements, but basically a lot of things are just unsubstantiated. Like the sentence mobility is good. That's, pardon my French, that's rubbish as long as I cannot prove that it is good. I can claim a lot of things. The key thing is a theory of change. I doubt so far that most universities have that for internationalization, because it means you define your goals first. You don't start with your activities and post-rationalize why you do them, but you start with knowing what you want to achieve. Then you define the impact and outcomes that relate to your goals. Then you define the outputs you want to do to achieve these impacts. And finally, you have to decide what inputs in terms of activities you need to achieve the outputs. It's reverse engineering, yeah, not the other way around. You know, we have 5 partnerships, we will generate this, and hopefully that and that will happen. That's not the right way to go. And finally, then you need to define indicators. Otherwise, it's just, you know, kind of hopeful activity and guesswork. So what could that look like? And just to show it, you know, this might be your goal, you know, to improve inclusion. That sounds very simplistic. It's not. It's a super blurred principle. It might have 3 totally different impacts: to improve mindset, to improve a mix of participation, to have maybe another outcome. And to do that, you need to look at maybe a lot of competence areas you want to do something. You might need a lot of input outputs to these related outcomes. And in the end, you might have a number of activities that relate. Key thing here is an impact without an outcome or without an input related to the impact is meaningless, because if you want to achieve something, but you don't know what should lead to it, forget about it. Also, if you have an output which doesn't lead to any outcome, forget about the output, because it's useless time investment. Those are things, you know, this is why such a theory of change is super important. If something does not have an arrow linking to something else, it means you have a break in the logic, in the chain of logic. And it also shows the more you want to achieve, the much more complex this whole picture becomes. So to focus on some aspects, mainly one goal, 1 to 2 impacts, be very focused on the outputs you want to achieve, and then know what activities you want to do. That's probably a bit cleverer way to go. What is normally done are perceptional surveys. I think that's very common as it is limited. I always say, imagine a mathematics professor would ask their students after the class, so what do you think? How good are you in algebra now? And the student says, I think I'm fantastic. And the professor says, okay, you get a first class based on your opinion. What? But that's what we do in internationalization. You ask 100 students, yeah, what was your experience? Oh, it was fantastic. So we claim our students have a fantastic experience. If you ask somebody, how inclusive is your program? We're totally inclusive. Oh, they are totally inclusive. Now they're all thinking, oh, fantastic. You know, what does that mean? Nothing. Collecting input numbers, that's for me like with a library. What is the better library? One that has 500 shelves, 5 books, and 1 is loaned per week, or one that has 50 shelves, 500 books, and 20 are loaned per week? Obviously the second. In our logic, it's the first. We brag about number of partnerships, number of activities, means nothing. Collecting what direct results, were achieved. So like that means more like how many people do I send somewhere? How much? Obviously that is size biased. You know, the bigger you are, the more you produce. You know, NUC Charlton will produce a lot more than a tiny college in rural Thailand maybe, but maybe that small college achieves much more in the change of mindset in their people because it, you know, it deals with a different situation. So maybe if related to their goal, it achieves even more. We don't know, right? So size matters when you look at direct results, but it doesn't matter when you look at impact. Cool. And then also this description of activities, super useful.
5 more minutes.
We are running, yeah. But in the end, not really super useful for the manager. Really, things are pre to post data collection, coherence testing, significance tests, co-organised, and the OECD DAC benchmarks. Those are things that we should do. I just rush through them. You need a baseline. You need to know where you start. If you don't know what your people are before you start, all the measuring is for nothing. You should not trust people's opinion. Really, don't. You know, I mean, we know that from social media. And we, if possible, do not compare groups like our students before, our after, but do it paired. So a single person, trace the person, you know, by coding, you know, then even it is GDPR compliant. You can look at the details there. Coherence testing is really nice. You know, the blue line is the best one. You know, the closer it is all to what you say. The green line has the same result as the blue line, but it means only very few people really match your criteria. Okay, so coherence can be an important thing. The most simplistic thing everybody is doing is, of course, significance tests. I can't go into that, but it's a very simple method in statistics, and it just simply tells you whether you have an accidental result or a real result. And my favorite is this here. Very few in higher education use it, but it's super simple to do, and it's fantastic. You see the blue curve, the blue line moving means the far away it moved from the orange, the more you achieved, really. Yeah, and there is a simple way to measure it, and co-organised stems from medical science. So this, for me, among all the testing materials, is or tools, is the nicest one to use, because you can really see whether you achieve something. You just need pre to post data for it. And just to close, things that we use, for example, in our projects is Big 5 inventory factor openness. It's public, you can use the items, easy to measure. Attitudes towards internationalization, you don't ask about your personal opinion, but you ask what you think about the institution you work with. So that would also work, for example, then in inclusion. You know, ask the people about what they think about the inclusion of their institution, not themselves. That makes them more objective. And there's also an IMPI toolbox, which is for internationalization. But as I say, if you often simply exchange the words, you will have the same kind of logic for inclusion. But that one is focused on input and output. So it's more a backup thing. And then it's about visualization, coming to an end here. This is just using dummy data for a tool I produced for a client. You have to make things known, you know? If you're not bragging about what you do, nobody knows what you do. And you can only do that with quantitative data. Nobody's impressed only by qualitative you know, sayings. So make it visualized. Just to finalize, if you want to look a little bit into projects which are often a lot about inclusion, because we work on this topic of internationalization, higher education for society, you're super welcome to come. Our session our conference starts tomorrow, and it's for 2 days. It's online, it's for free. You can just simply log in. And that's it for me. Thanks so much.